"You disgusting old man! Look what you've done to my dress!" The words sliced through the glittering ballroom like a blade, instantly silencing the refined murmur of cocktail conversation. 500 heads swiveled as one toward the commotion, unfolding in the center of the Harrington family's annual charity gala. The grand ballroom of the Harrington Plaza, a monument to wealth with its soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and marble columns, fell into a hush so complete you could hear the ice settling in champagne glasses. At the epicenter of the sudden silence stood Georgina Harrington, heiress to the Harrington real estate empire, her face contorted in a mask of pure, undiluted rage. Her champagne-colored Dior gown, worth more than most Americans' monthly salary, now bore a dark crimson stain spreading across its delicate fabric like a bloodstain on fresh snow. The $18,000 dress had been flown in from Paris specifically for this evening, a fact she had mentioned to anyone within earshot for the past week. Before her, on the gleaming marble floor, knelt an elderly black man in a janitor's uniform, desperately trying to clean up the spilled red wine with a small cloth. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he worked, his eyes fixed downward, avoiding the hurricane of hatred directed at him. Despite his hunched position, there was something in his bearing, a dignity that seemed at odds with his current situation, that made a few observers shift uncomfortably in their Louboutins and bespoke Italian shoes. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he murmured, his voice steady despite the public humiliation. "It was an accident. I didn't see you turn around." His words carried a refined quality that seemed incongruous with his uniform, the cadence of education, of thoughtfulness. This subtle contradiction was lost on Georgina, whose fury had transformed her normally photogenic features into something ugly and distorted. Georgina's laughter was cruel and sharp, cutting through the ballroom's tense silence. "An accident? Of course it was an accident. That's all your kind ever contributes, accidents and problems." She gesticulated wildly, sending her diamond bracelet catching the light, scattering prismatic reflections across the scene like cold, hard stars. The words "your kind" hung in the air, their implication unmistakable. Some guests winced visibly. Others maintained practiced neutral expressions that revealed nothing. A select few nodded almost imperceptibly, their agreement with Georgina's sentiment betrayed only by the slightest movement. Phones rose from manicured hands throughout the ballroom, capturing the spectacle unfolding before them. The cream of Boston society, banking executives, tech entrepreneurs, old money families, watched with expressions ranging from uncomfortable winces to barely concealed smirks. In this gilded room, someone else's humiliation had become the evening's unexpected entertainment. "This will definitely go viral," whispered a young socialite to her companion, adjusting her angle to better capture the confrontation. "Poor Georgina's dress is absolutely ruined." "Poor Georgina," her friend whispered back. "What about poor—" She glanced at the janitor's name badge. "Thomas, he looks mortified." "Please, he probably makes minimum wage for a reason." The wine had splashed not just on Georgina's dress, but also across the floor, creating a small crimson pool that reflected the opulent chandeliers above. Beauty and ugliness mirroring each other in a moment frozen in time. Maxwell Harrington, patriarch of the family and CEO of Harrington Enterprises, strode toward the scene with the confidence of a man who had never faced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. At 63, he carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who had inherited wealth rather than created it. His tuxedo cost more than the janitor would earn in 6 months, his watch more than a year's salary. "What's going on here?" he demanded, though the scene was painfully obvious to everyone. His voice carried the unmistakable tone of a man accustomed to immediate deference, sharp, commanding, with an underlying threat for those who failed to comply. "This person," Georgina spat, gesturing dismissively at the kneeling man as if he were an object rather than a human being, "ruined my gown. The gown I specifically had flown in from Paris for tonight's announcement." Her voice crescendoed. with each word escalating from anger to something approaching hysteria. Maxwell's face darkened as he looked down at the janitor, his expression shifting from annoyance to contempt in the space of a heartbeat. "Who let maintenance staff into the main ballroom during the event? This is completely unacceptable." He spoke as if Thomas were not present, as if he were discussing a malfunctioning appliance rather than a person kneeling at his feet. The elderly man slowly rose to his feet, joints creaking slightly with the effort. Despite his janitor's uniform, there was something in his posture, something in the quiet dignity with which he held himself, that seemed oddly incongruent with his apparent station. His name badge read simply Thomas, but his eyes, deep, intelligent, observant, held something that none of the Harringtons noticed: calculation. "I apologize for the inconvenience," Thomas said, his voice surprisingly rich and measured. "I was asked to attend to a spill near the east entrance." His diction was perfect, his composure remarkable given the circumstances. A few of the more perceptive guests noticed this discrepancy, the disconnect between his position and his presence, but most were too entranced by the drama to pay it any mind. Charlotte Harrington, Maxwell's wife and the family matriarch, glided over, her face a perfect mask of practiced disdain. Her silver hair was styled in an immaculate updo that had cost $800 that morning, her neck and ears adorned with diamonds. "That could have purchased a modest home outright. Well, you've certainly created a much bigger problem than you've solved, haven't you?" Her voice dripped with condescension, each syllable precisely calibrated to wound. She turned to her husband, not bothering to lower her voice. "Maxwell, this is why I said we should have hired that premium service company. These discount workers are simply not up to standard." The crowd had formed a loose circle around the unfolding drama, their jewels catching the light, their expressions a catalogue of human reactions: embarrassment, schadenfreude, discomfort, amusement. The social hierarchy of Boston's elite was on full display, with the distance each person maintained from the scene indicating their place in the pecking order. Among them, Braden Harrington, the family's 30-year-old son and heir apparent, was recording the entire incident on his phone, narrating for his social media followers. His chiseled features, the result of both good genes and strategic cosmetic procedures, were animated with malicious glee. "Check this out, guys. Hired help crashing our party. Comedy gold," he snickered, zooming in on Thomas's face. "This is why Dad should have listened to me about automated cleaning systems. You get what you pay for." Thomas stood still, absorbing the public degradation with remarkable composure. He made no attempt to defend himself against the barrage of insults. Instead, he simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. Not the rough cloth he'd been using to clean the spill, but a pristine square of what appeared to be hand-embroidered silk with the monogram TJ delicately stitched in one corner. "Perhaps this will help with your dress, Mum," he said, offering it to Georgina with a gesture that somehow managed to be both humble and dignified. A complex social calculation that went completely unnoticed by the Harringtons, but raised eyebrows among a few of the more observant guests. She recoiled as if he'd offered her a dead rat. "I don't want anything that's been in your pockets," she sneered, her lip curling in disgust. "What I want is for you to disappear. Security!" Two men in dark suits materialized instantly, flanking Thomas with the practiced efficiency of those accustomed to removing problems before they could disrupt the carefully maintained facade of perfection. Maxwell stepped closer, towering over Thomas, with all the practiced intimidation of old money speaking to the help. His cologne, an exclusive blend that cost $1,000 per ounce, created an olfactory boundary between them, another marker of the vast gulf that separated their worlds. "Do you have any idea how much that dress costs? More than you'll make in a year, hell, more than you'll make in 5 years. His voice was low, meant only for Thomas and those standing closest, imbuing the moment with an intimacy that made it somehow more devastating than a public shout would have been. Thomas looked directly into Maxwell's eyes, and for just a moment, something flickered there, not fear, not anger, but something far more dangerous, calculation. A flash of something so unexpected in the eyes of a supposed janitor that Maxwell almost took a step back. "I believe I have some idea of its value, sir," Thomas replied quietly, "just as I have some idea of the value of dignity, which appears to be in tragically short supply this evening." The ballroom went deadly silent. No one spoke to Maxwell Harrington like that, especially not the help. "Get him out," Maxwell ordered, his voice dropping to a threatening growl, "and make sure he never works in this building again." As security began to escort Thomas toward the service exit, Maxwell called after him, "You're nothing, you understand me? Nothing." Thomas paused, turned slightly, and with perfect composure said, "We'll see about that, Mr. Harrington. We'll see about that very soon." No one in that glittering ballroom could have possibly imagined what those words truly meant. No one could have guessed that in exactly 45 minutes the entire Harrington empire would begin to crumble, all because they had mocked the wrong janitor. The service corridor of the Harrington Plaza was a stark contrast to the opulence of the ballroom. Gone were the crystal chandeliers and marble floors, replaced by harsh fluorescent lighting and industrial tile. The walls here weren't adorned with priceless art, but with fire evacuation plans and employee regulations. This was the hidden backbone of luxury, the unseeing infrastructure that kept wealth functioning smoothly, designed to be invisible to those who benefited from it. Thomas walked steadily through this backstage of wealth, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. His pace was unhurried, deliberate, not the shuffling gait of a defeated man, but the measured stride of someone executing a plan. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, almost imperceptible. The security guards had been surprisingly gentle once they'd escorted him through the service doors. Perhaps something in Thomas's demeanor had given them pause. The taller one had even mumbled, "Sorry about that, sir," before returning to the gala, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts and the beginnings of a plan that would shake Boston's elite to their core. At 67, Thomas Johnson had spent a lifetime being underestimated. Tonight was merely the most recent, and soon to be the most expensive, example. He ran his hand over his salt and pepper hair, straightening himself to his full height now that he was unobserved. The stooped posture he'd adopted in the ballroom had been part of his disguise, a physical manifestation of the invisibility society imposed on men like the one he was pretending to be. He pulled out his phone, not the basic model one might expect a janitor to carry, but the latest flagship smartphone in a custom leather case. His fingers, nimble despite their age, navigated to a secure messaging app that required both facial recognition and a complex passcode. "Patricia," he dictated, his voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of authority. Crisp, confident, accustomed to being obeyed. "Cancel my morning meetings, all of them, and prepare the files on Harrington Enterprises. Every subsidiary, every pending deal, every vulnerability. I want it all on my desk by 7 a.m. A swift response appeared. "Understood, sir. Should I alert the board about potential action regarding the Harrington merger?" Thomas paused, looking back toward the ballroom where Boston's elite continued their self-congratulatory evening, blissfully unaware of who they had just humiliated. Through the service door's small window, he could see flashes of jewelry catching the light, hear the muffled sound of orchestral music and laughter. "No," he replied, his voice hardening. "Not yet. This will be my decision alone." He pocketed the phone and continued down the hallway, past supply closets filled with the tools of invisible labor, mops, buckets, cleaning solutions, the unglamorous necessities that kept the facade of luxury pristine. He nodded to a young man pushing a laundry cart, who gaped in surprise at seeing someone in a janitor's uniform walking with such confidence. Eventually, Thomas reached a service elevator tucked away in a remote corner. Instead of going down to the exit as the security team would have expected, he pressed the button for the penthouse level. The elevator required a key card for that floor, which Thomas produced from his wallet. Not the wallet of a janitor, but a sleek carbon fiber card holder containing the credentials of a man who moved billions with a signature. As the elevator ascended, Thomas removed the name tag reading Thomas from his uniform. He studied it for a moment, then tucked it into his pocket, a souvenir of the evening's revelations. The subtle transformation had begun, from invisible servant to visible power. The elevator doors opened to a private office suite, one that looked down upon the ballroom through one-way glass. The contrast was immediate and striking. While the service corridors had been all utility and no comfort, this space combined both in perfect measure. Custom hardwood furnishings, subtle recessed lighting, and state-of-the-art technology blended seamlessly in an environment designed for one purpose, the exercise of power. From this vantage point, Thomas could see the Harringtons and their guests still celebrating, still laughing, some still sharing the video of his humiliation. They appeared like actors on a stage, beautiful, polished, and utterly unaware of the audience watching their performance with a critical eye. A distinguished woman in her 50s looked up from a computer terminal as he entered. Her tailored suit and professional demeanor marked her as an executive, not a secretary. Her eyes widened at his janitor's uniform, genuine shock breaking through her professional composure. "Mr. Johnson, what on earth?" "A little field research." "Diane," Thomas said, his voice now carrying the weight of command that he had carefully hidden downstairs. The transformation was remarkable, his posture straighter, his gestures more decisive. His entire presence expanded to fill the room. "Turns out the Harringtons are exactly who we thought they were." He gestured to a garment bag hanging in the corner. "Is that my change of clothes?" "Yes, sir. And the merger documents are ready for your review before tomorrow's signing." Diane's professionalism reasserted itself quickly, though her eyes still held questions. "The legal team said everything is in order, $5 billion and change that will effectively save Harrington Enterprises from collapse." Thomas nodded, his expression grim. "There won't be any signing tomorrow." Diane's face registered shock. She had been with Thomas for 15 years, had seen him make bold decisions that confounded the financial world, but his tone suggested something more personal than business. "Sir, the Infinite Horizon merger is worth—" "I know exactly what it's worth," Thomas interrupted, beginning to unbutton the janitor's uniform. $5.2 billion. The deal that would save Harrington Enterprises from the financial precipice they've been teetering on for the past 18 months. He removed the uniform top, revealing a physique more vigorous than his age might suggest. Beneath the disguise was a man who clearly spent time keeping himself fit, not for vanity, but for longevity and purpose. The plain white t-shirt he wore underneath would soon be replaced by custom Egyptian cotton. "What they don't know," he continued, his voice taking on an edge of steel, "is that I've been acquiring their debt through shell companies for the past year. I control their fate already. This merger was simply going to be more merciful." "You damn. We're going to save them?" Diane asked, bewildered, setting aside her tablet to give him her full attention. "After everything Maxwell has done to undermine his father's legacy?" Thomas's face darkened, shadows playing across features that had weathered both poverty and wealth. "I was going to salvage what Maxwell's father built. William Harrington was a decent man, flawed but decent. His son has squandered that legacy both financially and morally." He buttoned a crisp white shirt, the transformation from janitor to titan unfolding before Diane's eyes. Each movement was deliberate, a ritual of return to his true identity. The janitor's uniform lay discarded on a chair, a costume no longer needed. "Tonight was my final test. I wanted to see who they truly were when the cameras weren't rolling, and the business press wasn't watching." His voice hardened, the sound of judgment being rendered after careful deliberation. "And now I know." From the one-way glass, they watched. As Maxwell Harrington took the stage downstairs, tapping a champagne glass for attention, the crowd hushed in anticipation, their faces upturned, expectant. They resembled worshippers at the altar of wealth, unaware that their god had feet of clay. Ladies and gentlemen, Maxwell's voice boomed through the speakers in Thomas's office. Tomorrow marks the beginning of a historic new chapter for Harrington Enterprises. While I can't reveal all the details yet, I'm pleased to announce that we'll be finalizing the largest merger in our company's history. The crowd erupted in applause. Maxwell beamed, soaking in the adoration, completely unaware that the architect of his salvation was watching from above and had just decided on his destruction. Thomas finished knotting his tie, a deep, powerful crimson that matched the wine stain on Georgina's dress. The symmetry was not lost on him. He straightened his platinum cufflinks emblazoned with the letters TJ, the same monogram that had been on the handkerchief Georgina had rejected with such disgust. Diane, contact legal. I want options for dissolving the merger agreement without a liability. Then call Marcus at the Journal. It's time the market learned some truths about Harrington's finances. Diane stared at him, comprehending the magnitude of what he was setting in motion. Sir, this will destroy them completely. Not just the company, but the family. Everything. Thomas Johnson, founder and CEO of Infinite Horizon Investments, controller of $218 billion in assets, and the man the Harringtons had just thrown out of their party, looked down at the celebration below. He watched Georgina laughing as she recounted his humiliation to a fresh audience. He observed Braden showing the video to an appreciative circle of sycophants. He saw Maxwell basking in premature triumph. Yes, he said simply, it will. In the reflection of the one-way glass, the janitor had vanished completely. In his place stood a man whose journey from poverty to power had taught him that true worth was never measured by others' perceptions, and that dignity, once violated, commanded a price that few were prepared to pay. Dawn broke over Boston's financial district, painting the glass towers in hues of gold and amber. The early morning light caught the edges of skyscrapers, transforming them into gleaming monoliths, monuments to ambition, power, and wealth. Traffic was just beginning to build on the streets below as the city's economic engine roared to life for another day of fortunes made and lost. By 6:30 a.m., Thomas Johnson had already been at his desk for an hour, reviewing documents with the focused intensity that had built his fortune from nothing. He moved through the Harrington files methodically, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, occasionally making notes in precise, economical handwriting. Each page he turned revealed another piece of the Harrington Empire's precarious foundation: over-leveraged assets, cash flow problems, desperate maneuvers disguised as strategic pivots. Infinite Horizon's headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a sleek skyscraper, a building that ironically had once belonged to Harrington Enterprises before Maxwell had been forced to sell it in one of his many desperate attempts to shore up his failing company's balance sheet. Thomas had purchased it through a shell company, another move in a chess game the Harringtons never realized they were playing. His corner office offered a panoramic view of the city awakening, but Thomas barely glanced at it. His attention remained fixed on the documents before him. Balance sheets, loan agreements, credit facilities, all telling the same story. A dynasty built on sand, maintained by reputation rather than sound business practices. Patricia entered, carrying a leather portfolio embossed with the Infinite Horizon logo. At 58, she'd been Thomas's right hand for 20 years, witnessing his rise from ambitious investor to financial kingmaker. Her tailored suit and understated jewelry spoke of refined taste and the quiet confidence that came from being indispensable to one of the most powerful men in Boston. The Harrington files, as requested, she said, placing them before him. Complete. Financial history, personal holdings, real estate portfolios, and offshore accounts. She paused, studying his face. And, sir, may I ask why you were dressed as a janitor at their gala last night? Richards from security called me in a panic when he saw you on their surveillance feed. Thomas looked up, the hint of a smile softening his serious expression. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, highlighting features that carried the quiet strength of a man who had fought for everything he possessed. An old habit, Patricia. My grandmother cleaned houses for families like the Harringtons. She always said, "You never know someone's true character until you've seen how they treat those they think are beneath them." His voice carried the slight rasp of age, but maintained the clarity and precision that had made board members and politicians alike listen when he spoke. He opened the portfolio, scanning the detailed analysis of Harrington Enterprises' precarious financial position. The numbers were even worse than he'd anticipated, a company hemorrhaging cash, maintained only by Maxwell's increasingly desperate financial engineering. "And last night, the Harringtons showed me exactly who they are." Patricia nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. She'd been with Thomas long enough to recognize when his decisions transcended mere business. This merger wasn't just business. For you, was it? She settled into the chair across from him, abandoned the usual professional distance. This moment called for candor, initially. "Yes, William Harrington, Maxwell's father, gave me my first real opportunity 40 years ago. He saw something in a young black man that others missed." Thomas's eyes softened with memory, then hardened as he continued. "I was working as a night janitor at Harrington Tower while putting myself through school. William found me studying calculus during my break. Instead of reprimanding me, he set up a scholarship." He rose, moving to the window. The rising sun cast his silhouette against the cityscape, a self-made man looking out over a city that had once offered him nothing but obstacles. "I wanted to repay that debt by saving his family's company from his son's incompetence. William built something worthwhile. Maxwell has been systematically destroying it with his arrogance and short-sightedness. And now?" Patricia asked, though his decision was already evident in the set of his shoulders. "Now I'll let nature take its course." He tapped the financial reports spread across his desk. The pages were filled with red ink, declining revenues, mounting debt, failed ventures. "According to these, without our capital injection, Harrington Enterprises has approximately 6 weeks before they default on their loans. Loans that, as you know, my shell companies have been quietly acquiring." The intercom buzzed, interrupting the moment. His assistant's voice carried a note of tension, rarely heard in the disciplined environment of Infinite Horizon. "Sir, Maxwell Harrington is in the lobby demanding to see you. He's quite agitated. Security reports he's shouting and appears disheveled. They're asking how you'd like to proceed." Thomas exchanged a look with Patricia. The timing was faster than he'd anticipated. Maxwell must have received the cancellation notice the moment the markets opened. "Send him up," Thomas said, straightening his tie. "And Patricia, stay. I want a witness for whatever happens next." 5 minutes later, Maxwell Harrington burst into Thomas's office without waiting for an introduction. His normally impeccable appearance was in disarray, tie askew, hair uncombed, eyes wild with panic. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning chill, and his breathing came in short, irregular gasps. The contrast between his panic and Thomas's calm was striking, a visual representation of their fundamentally different approaches to power and privilege. "Johnson, what the hell is going on?" Maxwell's voice boomed through the office, desperation stripping away the veneer of refinement. "My CFO just got a call saying the merger documentation has been pulled. Our stock is already down 12%. In pre-market trading." Thomas rose slowly from behind his desk, letting the full impact of recognition wash over Maxwell's face. He said nothing, allowing the moment to expand, letting Maxwell's mind make the connections at its own pace. Maxwell's eyes darted from Thomas's face to his immaculate suit, then back again. Confusion, disbelief, and finally horrified realization chased across his features in rapid succession. The blood drained from his face so quickly that Patricia took an instinctive step forward, concerned he might faint. "You," Maxwell whispered, the word barely audible. "The janitor, last night. This is some kind of joke." "No joke, Mr. Harrington. Just consequences." Thomas's voice was level, controlled, the voice of a man who had made billions by mastering his emotions. Maxwell staggered slightly, reaching for a chair to steady himself. The polished exterior that had intimidated employees and competitors for decades cracked completely, revealing the frightened man beneath. "You can't do this. The deal is all but signed. Our shareholders have been notified. The press release is scheduled for noon." His voice rose with each sentence, edging toward hysteria. "We've already made commitments based on the expected capital. Infusion, all preparations but no binding agreement," Thomas replied calmly, retaking his seat. His movements were unhurried, deliberate, a stark contrast to Maxwell's frantic energy. "My legal team confirms we're well within our rights to withdraw. But why?" Maxwell's voice cracked with desperation. His hand shook as he gripped the back of the chair, knuckles whitening. A faint sheen of sweat had broken out across his forehead. "Whatever your issue is, we can work it out. This deal is worth $5 billion, Thomas finished. "Yes, I'm aware of the exact figure that would save your family from bankruptcy." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit before you fall, Mr. Harrington. Your color concerns me." Maxwell collapsed into it, his arrogance evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. The man who had called Thomas nothing just hours before now sat before him, reduced to pleading for his financial survival. "Last night," Thomas continued, folding his hands on the desk, "your family showed me who you truly are, not who you pretend to be for the business press or your social media followers, who you really are when you think no one of consequence is watching." Recognition dawned in Maxwell's eyes, followed immediately by calculation. The businessman in him began, frantically searching for a way out, an angle, a narrative that might salvage the situation. "The janitor? That was some kind of test?" His voice had dropped to a whisper. "Not initially. I was simply doing my due diligence, observing your organization from the inside before finalizing our partnership. But your family's reaction became a test of character, one you failed spectacularly." Thomas's tone remained even, but his eyes had hardened. "Over a spilled drink." "You're destroying a century-old company over a spilled drink?" Maxwell leaned forward, incredulity momentarily overriding his panic. A flush of anger colored his cheeks, bringing some life back to his ashen face. Thomas leaned forward, his voice deadly quiet. "No, Mr. Harrington, not over a spilled drink. Over the word nothing. Over you people. Over the casual cruelty your family displayed. Over the fundamental disrespect you showed to another human being." He stood, signaling the meeting's end. His height, his presence, his calm authority all combined to make Maxwell seem smaller in comparison. "Your father understood something you never learned. Wealth without character is just decorated poverty." Maxwell's phone began buzzing incessantly. Likely his executive team, already receiving questions from alarmed investors. The device vibrated across the polished desktop like a trapped insect, each notification another blow to the Harrington empire. "Please," Maxwell whispered all. Pretense gone. His voice broke on the word, revealing the depth of his desperation. "You can't do this to us. My family, my children, our name." Thomas looked at him with something between pity and disgust. He saw not just the arrogant man from the previous night, but the accumulation of a lifetime of privilege without purpose, entitlement without merit. "I'm not doing anything to you, Mr. Harrington. I'm simply stepping aside and letting you experience the consequences of your own actions, both financial and moral." As Maxwell Harrington stumbled from his office, Thomas returned to the window. Below, Boston continued its morning rhythm, unaware that one of its oldest financial dynasties had just begun its final collapse. All because its heir had failed to recognize a simple truth, that dignity, once trampled, exacts a price no fortune can afford. By noon, the financial district was buzzing with rumors. By 2 p.m. it was chaos. The trading floor of Boston Capital Management resembled a war zone, brokers shouting into phones, analysts huddled around terminals, faces pale with shock as they watched the unprecedented collapse of one of the city's oldest financial institutions. Harrington Enterprises stock had begun a freefall the moment the markets opened. The ticker symbol HENT flashed blood red on every screen, the downward pointing arrows becoming steeper by the hour. "Circuit breaker triggered again," called out a senior trader, his voice rising above the din. "Third halt of the day. They'll resume trading in 15 minutes, but there's nothing but sell orders queued up." The expected merger announcement never came. Instead, a terse statement from Infinite Horizon confirmed negotiations had been permanently terminated due to irreconcilable differences in corporate values. Those 11 carefully chosen words sent shockwaves through Wall Street, triggering a tsunami of speculation, panic, and recrimination. Financial reporters stationed outside Harrington Plaza were broadcasting live updates, their carefully maintained, professional demeanors cracking under the weight of the unfolding drama. Behind them, employees could be seen exiting the building, cardboard boxes in hand, their faces masks of confusion and fear. Sources inside Harrington Enterprises confirm that without the Infinite Horizon merger, the company faces imminent liquidity issues, a CNBC reporter stated grimly. Trading has been halted 3 times today as shares plunged 68% before triggering circuit breakers. Analysts are questioning whether the company can survive the week. Inside the Harrington Building's executive floor, panic reigned. The once pristine boardroom had transformed into a chaotic command center. Discarded coffee cups littered the custom mahogany table, hastily printed financial projections covered every surface, and the air was thick with desperation. Maxwell paced the boardroom like a caged animal, his earlier polish completely abandoned. His suit jacket was thrown over a chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms slick with nervous sweat. Every few minutes he would bark contradictory orders at his increasingly desperate executive team. Call Johnson again, offer him better terms, any terms. He slammed his fist on the table, causing water glasses to jump. Then get me the governor on the phone. He owes me after the fundraiser last month. And where the hell is that report on our cash position? The CFO, a gaunt man with permanent worry lines etched into his forehead, looked up from his laptop. "Maxwell, we've called Johnson's office 17 times. They're not taking our calls. And our cash position," he swallowed hard, "we have enough liquidity for maybe 3 weeks of operations. The credit lines are maxed out." Georgina sat frozen in her father's leather chair, scrolling through her social media feed, where the first hints of their downfall were already trending. Her perfectly manicured nail trembled slightly as she swiped through an endless stream of notifications. "Someone leaked footage from last night," she whispered, her voice hollow with dawning horror. "The video of me and that janitor." "What?" Maxwell rushed over, grabbing her phone with such force that she flinched. There it was, Braden's video, now being shared with a very different context. Harrington family abuses elderly black worker, night before mysterious deal collapse. The hashtag Joe Harrington racism was trending nationally, accompanied by others like Cheat the Rich and Privilege Exposed. 50,000 shares already, Georgina murmured, her perfectly composed face beginning to crack. "And climbing every second. People are tagging my modeling agencies, my sponsors." Her voice broke on the last word as the implications sank in. "Daddy, they're saying horrible things about me." Maxwell barely registered his daughter's social catastrophe, his focus narrowing to the existential threat facing the family fortune. "Where the hell is our PR team? And get Braden in here now!" As if summoned by the mention of his name, Charlotte burst into the room, her perfect composure shattered. Her designer suit was still immaculate, but her eyes were wild with panic, and her usual careful makeup couldn't hide the blotchy redness of someone who had been crying. "The Gardner Foundation just called. They're reconsidering my position as chairwoman of the Spring Gala." Her voice cracked with disbelief. "They've never reconsidered me for anything. I built that gala." She clutched her phone like a lifeline. "I've received 17 cancellations for dinner parties. 17 in the last hour." Maxwell barely glanced at his wife, his attention focused on the financial hemorrhage rather than the social one. "Charlotte, now is not the time, don't you understand?" she hissed, grabbing his arm with surprising force. "This isn't just about money. They're excommunicating us. The Whitmores just uninvited us from their daughter's wedding. The Ashcrofts are suddenly too busy for the symphony benefit." For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Maxwell's face. Money could be rebuilt, but social capital once lost was nearly impossible to recover. The Harrington name, his father's legacy, was becoming toxic in real time. Across town, Thomas Johnson sat in a much different meeting. The conference room at Infinite Horizon hummed with focused energy as 12 men and women, all from backgrounds typically underrepresented in Boston's financial elite, reviewed documents and discussed strategy. The wall of windows offered a commanding view of the city, including the distant silhouette of Harrington Plaza. "The Prosperity Fund is now officially launched," Thomas announced, signing the final document with a fountain pen that had once belonged to his grandmother. $5 billion, the exact amount that would have saved Harrington Enterprises, now dedicated to funding minority-owned businesses throughout New England. He passed the document to his legal counsel, who added her own signature with quiet efficiency. A young woman at the table raised her hand. She was barely 30, with keen intelligence in her eyes and the confident demeanor of someone who had overcome significant obstacles. "Sir, the timing, people will make connections. The financial press is already speculating about why you pulled out of the Harrington deal." Thomas nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Let them. The story of why this fund exists should be told." His phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Harrington stock down 68% and falling. Board meeting emergency session. Creditors beginning to call in loans." Thomas set the phone aside, his expression resolute. "My grandmother, Rose Johnson, cleaned the Harrington family's homes for 30 years, he told the room, his voice taking on a deeper resonance. "She was invisible to them, except when something went wrong. Then suddenly she was very visible and very blamed." The room fell silent, the team members sensing they were witnessing something more personal than a business decision. He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. The afternoon sun cast his shadow long across the polished floor. "William, Harrington was different. He noticed me reading college textbooks while waiting for my grandmother. He paid for my education, not from charity, but because he recognized potential." "And now you're destroying his son's company?" someone asked quietly, voicing the question that hung in the air. Thomas turned, his expression firm but not unkind. "No. Maxwell destroyed his father's company through incompetence and arrogance. I'm simply declining to save it." His phone rang. Marcus from the Boston Financial Journal. Thomas answered on speaker, gesturing for the room to listen. "Johnson, you old fox," Marcus began without preamble. "The street is in an uproar. Sources inside Harrington's board meeting say they're hours away from declaring bankruptcy. Care to comment on why you pulled the merger?" Thomas considered his words carefully, aware that whatever he said would be headline news within minutes. "Character is the only true wealth," he replied finally. "The Harringtons are morally bankrupt. Their financial bankruptcy is merely catching up." "That's cryptic even for you, Johnson," Marcus chuckled. "Word is you were at their gala last night. Anything happen there?" "Ask the janitor," Thomas said simply, and ended the call. Back at Harrington headquarters, Braden finally stumbled in, clearly hungover. His designer clothes were rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, and his trademark confidence notably absent. He looked around the room with bewilderment, as if he'd wandered onto a movie set by mistake. "What's the emergency? Stock's down, so what? It'll bounce back, it always does." He dropped into a chair, reaching for a bottle of water. "You guys look terrible, by the way." Maxwell grabbed his son by the collar, yanking him upright with a fury that shocked everyone in the room. "There is no bounce back this time. We're finished, and your idiotic video is making it worse." Braden's face went slack with confusion. "My video? What are you talking about?" Before Maxwell could respond, the CFO entered, his face ashen. He clutched a printout in trembling hands, approaching Maxwell as one might approach a wounded animal. "The banks are calling in our loans. All of them, simultaneously." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Every credit facility, every line of financing, they're demanding immediate repayment." "That's impossible," Maxwell whispered, releasing Braden to take the document. "They can't coordinate like that. It would be—" "They're not coordinating," the CFO interrupted, the words tumbling out. "They're all owned by the same entity. A holding company called Rose Investments purchased our debt over the last 6 months through various subsidiaries. Every loan, every bond, every financial obligation." The name meant nothing to Maxwell, but across town, Thomas Johnson was smiling as he signed the documents creating the Rose Johnson Memorial Scholarship for the children of service workers. The first dominoes of the Harrington empire had begun to fall. By sunset, the Harrington name had become toxic. The same social circles that had eagerly consumed their champagne 24 hours earlier now scrambled to distance themselves from the family's implosion. The transformation was not gradual. It was a violent severing, as if a contagious disease had been discovered in their bloodline. In the Harrington penthouse, a sprawling 8,000-square-foot monument to excess with panoramic views of Boston Harbor, Charlotte sat alone in her private sitting room. The space had been featured in Architectural Digest just 3 months prior, praised for its effortless elegance and understated luxury. Now it felt like a museum to a life already past. Charlotte stared at her phone in disbelief, scrolling through message after message of thinly veiled rejection. The device had once been a conduit for invitations and influence. Now it delivered only abandonment. Her perfectly manicured nails, freshly done that morning in anticipation of a charity luncheon she would never attend, clicked against the screen with increasing desperation. "They're calling us the bigot billionaires," she whispered, her voice hollow with shock. The hashtag was trending nationally, accompanied by the video of Thomas's humiliation played on an endless loop. Every cable news network had picked up the story. Every social media platform was awash with commentary. She looked up, her gaze fixing on the oil painting of 3 generations of Harrington women that hung above her marble fireplace. 30 years of social climbing. Gone. Just gone. Her social secretary had already called twice, overwhelmed by the cascade of cancellations. 17 charity boards had requested her resignation, some through sympathetic personal calls, others through terse emails clearly crafted by legal teams. 43 dear friends had cancelled upcoming engagements, citing sudden illnesses, travel plans, or scheduling conflicts so transparent they barely qualified as excuses. The Somerset Club, Boston's oldest and most exclusive social institution, where Charlotte had once reigned as an unofficial queen, had sent a letter expressing deep concern about recent events and suggesting a period of reflection regarding her membership. The carefully worded message might as well have been written in neon. She was no longer welcome. Down the hall, Maxwell barely heard his wife's distress. He sat slumped in his study, tie loosened, tumbler of 18-year-old Macallan clutched in his hand. The room, traditionally a sanctuary of masculine power, with its leather furniture and rare first editions, now felt like a mausoleum. Financial reports detailing their catastrophe were spread across his antique desk. The company's stock had been halted after falling 82%, a free fall so dramatic it had triggered regulatory intervention. Their creditors, all mysteriously connected to Rose Investments, had given them 48 hours to repay 1.8 billion loans. "It's not possible," he muttered, pouring his third scotch with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "We don't have it. Nobody has that kind of liquid capital on hand." The phone on his desk had fallen silent after hours of frantic calls to banks, investors, and former allies. Doors that had always swung open at the Harrington name were suddenly, inexplicably locked. Fair weather friends had vanished like morning. Fog under a harsh sun. The intercom buzzed, a sound that made Maxwell flinch. His executive assistant's voice, usually crisp and efficient, now trembled slightly with the weight of what she had to deliver. "Sir?" She began, hesitating just long enough for Maxwell to know what was coming. "The board has voted. Effective. Immediately, you've been removed as CEO of Harrington Enterprises." The glass slipped from Maxwell's hand, shattering on the marble floor. 18-year-old scotch soaked into the antique Persian rug, a small destruction mirroring the larger. Collapse of his world. "On what grounds?" he demanded, though he already knew the answer. "Loss of confidence, sir, and," another hesitation, "reputational damage to the company." The news shouldn't have been surprising. Board members had been avoiding his calls all afternoon, but the finality of it struck him with physical force. His father had founded the company with a single real estate development in 1947. For 78 years, a Harrington had always occupied the CEO's office, until today. Across town, Thomas Johnson watched the evening news in his modest Dorchester home, not the luxury penthouse many might expect from a billionaire. The 3-bedroom colonial had been meticulously maintained, but not ostentatiously upgraded. He had never left the neighborhood where he grew up, preferring to invest his wealth in the community rather than isolate himself from it. The living room was comfortable rather than showy, with well-worn furniture and walls lined with books. Photographs charted a journey from poverty to power. Thomas as a young man in a janitor's uniform, Thomas receiving his MBA, Thomas breaking ground on his first development, and prominently displayed, a black and white photo of Rose Johnson in her housekeeper's uniform, her eyes reflecting a dignity that transcended her circumstances. The screen showed protesters outside Harrington Plaza. Young activists carried signs, reading, "Privilege has a price, and dignity, dollars." The news anchor's voice was solemn. Demonstrations erupted after footage surfaced, showing the Harrington family's treatment of an elderly black employee. This amid allegations that systematic discrimination has been standard practice within the company. Thomas's phone rang. It was William Harrington Jr., Maxwell's younger brother. "Thomas." William's voice was quiet, lacking the bombastic confidence that characterized his brother. "It was you at the gala, the janitor." "Hello, William." "Yes, it was. You could have told me. I would have understood." Thomas sighed, looking out the window at the neighborhood where both men had once been boys. William visiting with his father on business. Thomas living in the small apartment his grandmother maintained. "Would you have warned your brother? Your niece?" A long pause, stretched between them, heavy with shared history and divergent paths. "Probably. Then you understand why I didn't tell you." William had always been the decent one, like his father. He'd rejected the family business, choosing instead to teach literature at a state university. The brothers hadn't spoken in years, their relationship fractured by Maxwell's increasingly ruthless business practices and social climbing. "My father would be heartbroken to see what's happening," William said, his voice catching slightly. "Your father would be heartbroken to see what Maxwell became," Thomas countered. "What they all became. The company was just a vehicle for him. The real legacy he wanted to build was one of opportunity and respect." Back at Harrington Plaza, the executive boardroom had transformed into a war room. The space, once a showcase of corporate power with its sweeping views and intimidating furnishings, now hummed with the energy of barely contained panic. Maxwell, stripped of his title but still fighting for survival, faced the remaining executives. Most avoided eye contact, their expressions a mixture of fear and calculation. Several chairs sat conspicuously empty, board members who had suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere. "There must be something," he insisted, his voice hoarse. "From hours of increasingly desperate strategizing. Some asset we've overlooked, some leverage we still have." The interim CEO, formerly Maxwell's CFO, shook his head. His suit, normally immaculate, looked as if he'd slept in it. "The past 18 hours had aged him visibly. We've lost 93% of our market value in a single day. Every financial institution in Boston is calling in their markers. Our credit rating has been downgraded to junk status." He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion evident in every movement. "And now," he slid a document across the table, A class action lawsuit from our service workers alleging systematic discrimination. Discrimination? Maxwell exploded, slamming his fist down hard enough to make water glasses jump. Because of one incident. With a janitor? No, the legal counsel interjected. She was new to the team, hired just 6 months earlier from a prestigious firm. Her expression suggested she was already updating her resume. Because apparently someone has been collecting evidence for years, testimonials from 147 employees, wage disparities, promotion patterns, internal emails. She looked ill. Including yours, Mr. Harrington. Maxwell's face went grey. My emails, the ones where you referred to the cleaning staff as barely human, where you suggested paying minority employees less because they should be grateful for any job, where you instructed HR to reject applications with ethnic-sounding names. The room fell silent. The only sound the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. How? Maxwell whispered, his bravado finally completely evaporating. How could anyone access those? The interim CEO's expression was grim. The evidence was submitted by Rose Investments' legal team. Before Maxwell could process this new blow, Georgina burst into the room, her face streaked with mascara. The young woman who had been the picture of privilege and poise just 24 hours earlier now resembled a panicked child. Her designer outfit, carefully selected for a magazine interview that had been abruptly cancelled, was rumpled, and her hands trembled visibly. "Daddy, they're revoking my membership at the Somerset Club. They said I've brought disrepute to a 150-year-old institution." Her voice broke on the last word, genuine shock in her eyes. "They can't do that. The waiting list is 12 years long. Grandfather was a founding member." No one answered her. They were all staring at their phones where breaking news alerts illuminated every screen with the same devastating headline: Harrington Enterprises, files for Chapter 11, bankruptcy protection. The Harrington empire, built over generations, had collapsed in less than 24 hours, toppled not by market forces or competition, but by the weight of its own character failings exposed to the unforgiving light of public scrutiny. 3 days after the collapse of Harrington Enterprises, Braden Harrington stood in the marble foyer of his family's penthouse, watching men in work uniforms carry away priceless artwork. Each painting that disappeared through the front door represented another piece of his family's legacy being dismantled. The Monet his grandfather had purchased in 1962, the Picasso his parents had acquired at auction to celebrate their 20th anniversary, all being loaded into unmarked vans by workers who handled these treasures with the clinical efficiency of hospital orderlies removing a corpse. "Can they really take everything?" he asked, his voice stripped of its usual arrogant bravado. For the first time in his 30 years, Braden looked his age, or older. The designer stubble that had been carefully cultivated for social media posts now just looked unkempt, a symptom of genuine neglect rather than affected nonchalance. Maxwell, slumped in an armchair nearby, didn't even look up. "They can and they will. The asset liquidation is just beginning." His voice was hollow, the voice of a man whose identity had been erased, letter by letter. "The cars are next, then the wine collection. By next week they'll start on the furniture." The doorbell rang, a sound that once announced the arrival of society's elite now heralded just another officer of the court, another accountant, another harbinger of their destruction. Braden flinched at the sound, as if physically struck. "Don't answer it," he whispered. But there was no ignoring reality anymore. A household staff member, one of the few who hadn't yet quit, opened the door to admit a woman in a crisp charcoal suit. She carried a leather portfolio emblazoned with the logo of the Boston District Attorney's Office. 6 months had passed since the night that destroyed the Harrington dynasty. Autumn had given way to winter, and winter had melted into a hesitant spring. The city had moved on to new scandals, new dramas, new cautionary tales of the wealthy and privileged. But for the Harrington family, time had frozen on that single catastrophic evening when their true character had been revealed to the world. Maxwell Harrington, once the titan of Boston real estate, now occupied a modest two-bedroom apartment in a building he would have previously considered beneath his notice. The space was temporary, like everything in his life now, furnished with generic rental pieces that bore no trace of his former taste or status. The man who had commanded boardrooms now spent his days in mandatory sensitivity training sessions, part of his plea agreement with prosecutors. He sat at a laminate kitchen table, reviewing documents that detailed the final dismantling of his family's legacy. The Harrington Foundation's remaining assets had been placed in a trust administered by former service workers. The family name had been removed from hospital wings and university buildings, even the plaza that had once been the crown jewel of their empire had been renamed Dignity Tower, a change that felt so pointed it could only have been intentional. His phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Maxwell answered with the wariness of a man who had grown accustomed to bad news, arriving without warning. "Mr. Harrington, this is David Chen from Thomas Johnson's office." Maxwell's grip tightened on the phone. "I didn't think Johnson took my calls anymore." "He doesn't typically," Chen replied, his tone professionally neutral, "but he asked me to extend an invitation. The Rose Johnson Service Workers Center is opening tomorrow in Dorchester. Mr. Johnson thought you might benefit from attending." "Benefit?" Maxwell repeated, incredulity momentarily overriding his new caution. "How exactly would watching Johnson dance on the grave of my family's reputation benefit me?" The lawyer's voice remained unruffled. "That characterization suggests you still don't understand what happened, Mr. Harrington. This isn't about your family's reputation. It's about dignity, something your father understood, but you seemingly forgot." Across town, Charlotte Harrington emerged from the subway, her first time using public transportation in decades. Her appearance had undergone a stark transformation. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect blowouts. Her silver hair now hung in a simple bob, her face bare of the expert makeup that had once been her armor. She carried a canvas tote rather than a Hermes bag. She made her way to a modest community center where a sign announced, "Job fair for experienced household managers." The irony wasn't lost on her. For 30 years, she had employed household staff without learning their last names. Now, at 61, she was hoping to become someone else's employee. The woman at the registration desk looked up, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm Maria Vasquez. I worked in your home for the Palmer Christmas party in 2018. Charlotte flushed, searching her memory and finding nothing. "I'm sorry, I don't remember me," Maria finished for her. "I know, I was just one of dozens of servers who made your parties possible." She pushed the registration form across the table. "Things change, don't they?" In the corner of the room, Georgina sat with Blair, both sisters nearly unrecognizable in their newfound humility. They had come to support their mother, a concept that would have been foreign to them 6 months earlier. "Do you think she'll actually get a job?" Blair whispered, watching Charlotte awkwardly fill out the application. Georgina shrugged. "She has to. The settlement took everything. We all have to work now." She glanced down at her own hands, the manicure grown out, calluses forming from her job as a barista, the only position she could find where her toxic online reputation hadn't preceded her. "I saw Thomas Johnson on TV yesterday," Blair said, quietly. The reporter asked if he felt any remorse for destroying our family. "Do you know what he said? That we destroyed ourselves?" "No. He said, I didn't destroy a family. I restored balance to a system that had been unjust for generations." Then he quoted someone, his grandmother, I think. "Dignity freely given costs nothing. Dignity demanded as a right carries a price tag few can afford." The sisters fell silent, contemplating words that would have seemed meaningless to them before, but now carried the weight of their lived experience. Next day, a small crowd gathered in Dorchester for the opening of the Rose Johnson Service Workers Center. The building once a neglected community space, had been transformed into a state-of-the-art facility offering legal aid, career development, healthcare, and childcare for service industry employees. Thomas Johnson stood on the steps, looking more like the distinguished CEO he was than the janitor the Harringtons had humiliated. Behind him, a large portrait of Rose Johnson smiled down at the assembled crowd, her dignity preserved not just in memory, but in concrete action. "My grandmother cleaned houses for Boston's wealthy for 47 years, Thomas began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. She entered through back doors, ate her lunch in supply closets, and was often treated as if she were invisible. But she never forgot her own worth." He gestured to the building behind him. "This center isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. It's about recognizing that the people who make our beds, serve our food, and clean our offices aren't just the help, they're the backbone of our society." From the back of the crowd, Maxwell Harrington watched silently. He had come alone, driven by something he couldn't quite name. Curiosity, perhaps, or the first stirrings of genuine remorse. As Johnson spoke, Maxwell found himself seeing his former adversary not as the architect of his destruction, but as the product of a system his own family had helped perpetuate. When the ceremony ended, Maxwell approached Thomas. The two men stood, face to face, one having lost everything, one having gained something far more valuable than wealth. "Was it worth it?" Maxwell asked. "Destroying an entire family's legacy to make your point?" Thomas studied him for a long moment. "The question isn't whether it was worth it to me, Maxwell. The question is whether the way you treated people was worth it to you." He turned to leave, then paused. "Your father once told me that a person's true character is revealed in how they treat those they believe can do nothing for them or to them. Perhaps it's time to rebuild your legacy on that foundation instead." As Thomas walked away, Maxwell remained on the steps, watching as the man he had called nothing transformed the lives of hundreds with the stroke of a pen, not through revenge, but through the most powerful force of all, the restoration of dignity.